I co-curated the current exhibition on Leonardo da Vinci, A Mind in Motion. I think it's very unusual to have an exhibition which concentrates wholly on the notebooks and gives visitors a real immersion into the way Leonardo used notebooks and the way his mind worked. We've taken our point of departure from the Codex Leicester, which is now belongs to Bill Gates in Seattle. We've done a selection of 8 sheets from the 18 sheets which comprise the Codex Leicester. And the Leicester notebook is, in fact, mainly about water. In fact, it was intended as a treatise on water. As many of you may know already, Leonardo, as part of his writing, and his writing output is huge. I mean, we have 7,000 pages which survive, and it's estimated that that's 25% of what he wrote. So, I mean, he's really an important writer. Leonardo, at various points in his career, planned to write treatises, extended studies of the subjects which most interested him. And you can see traces of, none of them were ever finished. You can see traces of those all through his output. But the treatise on water was the one that perhaps he got furthest with. Again, he didn't complete it, but he did get quite far. And what I want to explore in this very brief introduction is to take you through the exhibition, so to speak, some of the sheets from the exhibition, and to show you the ways that he was interested in water, taking, as I say, the point of departure from the Leicester notebook. Before we look at a sheet from the Leicester, it's worth saying that there were 3 aspects, perhaps, about Leonardo's interest in water, which it's worth singling out. I mean, it perhaps goes without saying because when we hear the name Leonardo, I suppose we think of him first and foremost as a painter. We think of the great paintings like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. So I think it goes without saying that he was interested in water, the movement of water aesthetically, and he was extraordinarily skilled in depicting it. But it's more important, perhaps, to look at the other 2 aspects of his interest in water, which were perhaps the 2 aspects which were more important to Leonardo himself and to the perception of Leonardo by his contemporaries. And that's first his practical interest in water. He was, if it's not anachronistic to describe him as this, a hydraulic engineer. He was interested in the management of water, in assessing and measuring and devising ways of dealing with the practical impacts of water, particularly of river management. And then the third aspect, so as an artist, as an engineer, and as importantly, as a scientist, to use that word again, for Leonardo, water really was the key to understanding natural laws, natural phenomena, for him, it was the most important of the 4 elements, in that it was the most visible element, the one that you could observe most consistently and continuously. And that meant that in observing, and he believed that observation, in this he was right at the sort of foundation of all science. He believed that observation was the basis of all our knowledge, and water was very useful to him because, as the most visible of all elements, you could study movement in water, and you could work out what the underlying laws of water in movement, of what motion was. So I'm going to sort of, as I race through all the sheets from the, not all the sheets, but some of the sheets from the exhibition. This is the Leicester, a sheet from the Leicester. And as you can see, unlike many of the sheets in Leonardo's notebooks, which can sometimes look rather chaotic, with a lot of drawings and a lot of texts on different subjects written at different times, often in different directions. The sheet of paper has been revolved and sort of written on it in different ways. This is, as you can see, a more systematic attempt to write a study of water. And the reason I've chosen this sheet is because of this, which is, in fact, a plan he's added afterwards. He's squeezed it in. You can see that he's written round the drawing of this wedge shape, which in the flow of water. So it's a kind of afterthought in which he's planning. He draws up a plan for the treatise, the book on water that he wants to write, and that he never finished. As so often with Leonardo. And I wanted to show it to you because simply the list of it, I apologize for the mistyping in book 6, it should be book 6. I wanted to show you this list because it gives you an idea of the extraordinary variety of the aspects of water which Leonardo is interested in. It starts off with of water in itself. That's water as an element without any context, so to speak. And then he goes through the various ways we find water on the earth, the sea and the rivers. And book 3 of the veins refers to a theory that Leonardo had, which was that water flowed through the earth in subterranean veins, very much like water flowed through the body, the blood flowed through the body in veins. I mean, it's the basis of that is the macrocosm, microcosm idea. But then if we go on, you notice the way he's interested in different aspects of the flow of water in rivers, the way the bottom of rivers affects the flow. So there's a whole chapter on the nature of the bottom of rivers, how that affects the flow of water. Book 6 is on objects in water. Book 7 is on various kinds of gravel. And book 8 looks at the surface. He was very aware that water, as it flowed through rivers and currents in the sea, sort of differed in types of motion from the surface to the depth. And then we move on to more practical aspects of his interest in water. So there's book 10 on river repairs, book 11 on conduits and canals, and then book 13 on machines turned by water. So there's an extraordinary variety in his approach to water. As I said, this treatise was never finished, but one of the interesting aspects of Leonardo's notebooks is what you might call their afterlife. It's a very complicated subject to study, what happened to his notebooks after he died, and the kind of interest which was shown in the notebooks and in his scientific work after he died. But 100 years after his death in 1519, in the early 17th century, there was a kind of revival of interest in his notebooks. By that time, many of the notebooks had found their way to Rome. He died, as I'm sure you know, in France, where he spent the last 3 years of his career. His notebooks were brought back to Italy by one of his pupils. They were bequeathed to this favorite pupil of his called Melzi, Francesco Melzi, who took them to his villa outside Milan. But a lot of them had ended up in Rome in the early 17th century, and scholars started to work on them and to finish the treatises which Leonardo had never completed. This is one which is based on a manuscript compilation of Leonardo's writings on water, not only from the Leicester, also from other notebooks. His observations on water were scattered over a whole series of notebooks. And it happened to be published in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, when there was again another wave of interest in Leonardo's scientific work. And I wanted to show you that, to show you the contents list of that manuscript compilation as it was published in the 19th century, which is a bit more organized than the one that Leonardo's own plan for the treatise, which we've just seen in the Leicester notebook, where he's talking about the movement of water, del moto, he's talking about waves in water, he's talking about what he calls the retrosi, which are the reflex movements of water, something which really interested him, falling water, and so on. And that first one, which is on the sphere of water, is a reference to the very sort of traditional framework within which he was working. It's one of the questions which needs to be raised when we talk about Leonardo as a scientist, the idea that each of the four elements had its own ideal sphere to which it belonged in terms of its weight. And I just wanted to show you that list. So what I'm going to do now is just go through looking at these three aspects. So Leonardo and his interest in water as an artist, as an engineer, and as a scientist. This is a famous painting by Leonardo's master in Florence, and by Andrea Verrocchio, whose studio Leonardo was apprenticed to already in his teens when he moved to Florence from Vinci, the village where he was born. And this, as I say, is by Verrocchio, but we know that Leonardo, already I think he was 20 here, contributed to the painting, and we know that the parts which he contributed in particular were the paintings of the parts to do with water, and this part here with Christ's feet, it's the baptism of Christ, Christ's feet in water, and I've done a blow-up of it here, where you can see how carefully he's painted the water running over the feet, and then the source of the water as it comes down to the pool in which Christ is standing in the background, which is the falling water here as it falls and splashes into the surface. So right, from a very young age, Leonardo was interested in different forms of water, objects in water, in this case feet, and in depicting them. And I wanted to put this alongside two sheets which are in the exhibition. This is a sheet from the Arundel, and this is a sheet, as you can see, very similar. This again is from the Leicester. And here he's studying, in the drawings in the margin here, different forms of water, Here we have a fallen wall, and what he's interested in is the angle of the wall, the way and where and how it falls in the flow of water. Here he's looking at surface currents and where the main depth of the water is in a straight canal. And here he's looking at the way water forms these spirals or vortices, which were shapes which fascinated him. So this is very much a study of water in, as it were, in how to sort of manage flow, whereas the Leicester looks again at ripples in water and is almost looking at them geometrically. So that relates very much to a sort of scientific interest in water and the way it appears. This is a wonderful drawing from the collection of drawings in the Royal Collection, where I suppose the immediate impact is aesthetic, is visual, but if you look very closely at it, you'll see that part of its sheer impact is in fact the power of observation as this strong stream of water flows in to the pool and creates ripples, waves on foam on the surface, and then under the surface, again, these scrolling shapes. And that is really what Leonardo is interested in. And this is another sheet from the Leicester, where I wanted to concentrate on this, which seem to be these two drawings, which are experiments he's carrying out outside or in his workshop, whereby here he's looking at the flow of water through pipes into two bowls. And here he's trying to measure the weight of water and the speed of water by placing a plank of wood with a balance, and it's basically a way of scientifically measuring the impact of a flow of water coming down. Here again, this is another famous drawing from a series of drawings he did right at the end of his life when he was already in France, which are known as the deluge drawings, which are these visions of apocalyptic storms and floods. And if you look closely, you can see here these houses and rocks. The houses are here. There's a town at the bottom, and then a mountain which is sort of crumbling under the force of the storm. But I wanted to put it alongside this sheet from the Arundel, which is in the exhibition, where on the right-hand side you've got a red chalk drawing, which is part of a series of drawings that he did at the beginning of the 16th century when he was back in Florence after a long stay in Milan, when he was exploring on commission from the Florentine government the possibility of building a canal to divert the course of the Arno River in Florence and in Tuscany away from Pisa. And there's a whole series of drawings, some more detailed than others, probably done while he was actually pacing along the river and trying to measure it and trying to work out where the tributaries flow into the river. And this is a drawing which is looking in particular at forms of soil erosion. This is an island in the middle of the river caused by water flow. He's looking at damage to weirs, wooden weirs here, which have been caused by the flooding in the river, and he's looking at how to prevent, it's a preliminary study, but what he's interested in is how to prevent the damage to riverbanks and the houses on the riverbanks. So those apocalyptic drawings at the end of his life are very much related to this practical concern as an engineer all through his life. And this again is a wonderful sheet from the Leicester, where here he's looking at different shaped objects and what they do to the flow of water. Here you have a cylinder, here you have two oval shapes, here you have a wedge shape, and so on. So this is an example where he's experimenting and observing like a scientist. And then finally, I wanted to show this wonderful study, again from an Arundel sheet in the exhibition, where he's looking at wave formation, and you can see with the letters which are keyed to the text, this extraordinary text which is in mirror script, where he's trying to work out the coordinates, the geometrical coordinates of the shapes of waves and the crests, and again, this sort of dipping form. And what the text makes clear is what he's interested in is also the relationship with the air, the pressure of the air on the curve of the water as it forms waves. And finally, I wanted to bring again the art in Leonardo and the science together in two drawings. This one on the left, from the Arundel notebook, which is a small drawing of waves rolling on a shore, on a sandy shore. Again, that's explained in the text. And put it alongside this extraordinary drawing of the head of Leda, again in the Royal Collection. And this is a direct comparison which Leonardo makes between the spiraling forms in water, vortices in water, and spiraling forms in hair. Here, these extraordinary curling plaited twirls of Leda's hair and the strands of it as it falls. And this relates to another one of Leonardo's treatises, which was a treatise on painting, again, which he never finished, which was again completed in the 17th century by scholars working on his manuscript legacy, in which he says explicitly that painters needed to understand what they were observing scientifically. And once you've understood the underlying laws of nature, of natural phenomena, then painters can reproduce them and depict them effectively. And he makes this explicit comparison by saying that once you understand the laws of underneath the motion of water, the same laws underpin the motion of hair on the human head. And it's an extraordinary example of the way Leonardo's scientific observations and scientific principles underlie his art. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'll hand over to the next speaker. Thanks very much.